I would just like to introduce someone who really needs no introduction. Yuval's been working in Lean and Agile for over 6 years now. Pretty much single-handedly brought Kanban and Lean to Israel. He's got a fantastic blog, and he's just published a book, Holy Land Kanban, which is available at this conference for sale. Yuval, cheers.
Thanks, Russell. This one. So, I'm working as an Agile consultant, and what I want to talk about today is some thoughts that came up during the last year or so with some client work. The main theme of the talk is the improvement journey. You can also look at it as the improvement mountain. So basically what we see here, and it's totally by chance that I found this picture. It's one of the initial pictures, initial themes or templates in Prezi, but it fits nicely into the theme, is that we're trying to do a journey when we go into an Agile or Lean transition, whatever change we're trying to do. And the problem that I'm seeing, or the struggle, is that while we want to reach a higher goal, reach a lot of agility and a lot of improvements, many organizations that I'm and the other people in Agile Sparks are working with find themselves stuck somewhere in the middle. They're stuck on the way. And it's frustrating for us because we know they can get more results. It's sometimes frustrating for them because they think they can get more results but don't know how to restart the engine. And it's also frustrating because as coaches, we like to work on the advanced stuff. We like to go to the heights, not to do all of the time just the way to base camp. So the talk today is about why it's important to keep on climbing and why it's not working as it should at the moment. Some stories from work that I've been doing about places where it didn't work versus places that it worked, and some tips about what to do with it. So let's start. If you look at your organizations, how many of your organizations are doing any kind of Agile, Lean, Kanban? Okay, makes sense. How many of you are doing retrospectives in your organizations? Okay. So think about your organization and try to do a ROTI, a return on time investment, for your retrospective. Think about what you think or what the people in your organization would think about how they feel about their retrospectives. So 5 fingers up means excellent. 1 means what a waste of time. Okay, so let's vote on that. Okay, reasonable numbers, not counting everyone, but not so bad numbers. But what I see in many organizations is the numbers are lower than you would expect. People are not really getting the value from these improvement activities, and that's part of the reason that they're stuck. And one of the first reasons is that they don't understand why it's important to improve. So let's talk about why we should care. For many people, Agile is just about breaking down a big project into smaller items, smaller iterations, smaller pieces, and doing incremental iteration, whatever. They don't even understand the full meaning of iteration. Well, what we're trying to do at the product or service level is actually to search for an improved way of delivering the service to the customer, providing more value, and we don't know. We're someplace in the improvement terrain. That's a model that I took off of the Adapt book, a very nice book to read, highly recommended. We're somewhere in this improvement landscape, and we should find our way to higher grounds. Higher grounds mean we're providing more value for the investment that we're giving. We have more capabilities. Now, this is nice, but the problem is that we don't have the map, and it's not a nice shiny day out there. It's foggy, and we're blindfolded. So we need to improve, but we don't even know what is the right direction. So we need to search for the right way. We don't even know if we put our leg over there, whether it's going up or falling, right? So Agile and Lean is continuously evolving the product and the service in the face of a complex world, the fog of the market. The other thing is that we're not really sure what is the right process for our context. So while we're continuously improving the product, doing this search, there's a similar search going on for the right process for us. Again, it's a fog of war. We don't know. We heard somewhere that Scrum works, or Kanban works, or XP works. We don't necessarily know exactly how it will work for our context. We don't know how easy it will be to adopt it. Will it match our culture or not? There are many questions. So what we need is to continuously improve. There's no single plan that we can take a recipe, run with it, finish with it. We need to start doing and then sense what's going on, try to do some probes to see what's working, and adapt. So that's why we need to continuously improve. Okay, so why is it not working? Why is it broken? There are many aspects here. I will not go into all of them. There's another version of the presentation where you can go through all of them if you want later on. Also, the article is in the proceedings covering everything. So the things I prioritized. So the first thing, which should come as quite trivial to Kanban practitioners, is that the scope of change that you're taking on matters. So a story here. I was working this year within an enterprise company, two groups, very similar, about 100 people each, sitting 2 floors, one at the second floor, the other is at the first floor, and they both wanted to go Agile. Now, both of them agreed that doing flow and limiting the number of themes going on and getting things to done before moving to other things was a good idea. That was the basic scope, the A covered in that story map over there. But the other one wanted to go stronger. They wanted to change the way the teams work, bring in new energies, do more stuff. All good things, all good things that help them. Okay? But what happened is because the B group took on more scope, it took them a bit more time and a lot more energies to do this change. And when they finished with this step of change, they were burned out. When I was trying to talk to them about, let's go to the next step. There are many cool new things that you can do now that you have these Scrum teams and this Kanban working. Let's do an improvement board. Yes, they did an improvement board. But when I took a picture and came 2 weeks after, I didn't even need to take another picture or look at the older picture to see that it looks pretty familiar. Nothing's changing. It's stalled. Okay? They were tired of the change. They needed some time to relax. So the first thing that you need to take care of is to choose the right implementation pace for your context. Sometimes it makes sense to go into a big change, but realize that later on you will need to rest. Sometimes it makes sense to go in a more evolutionary pace, more slowly. One thing to note is if you look at Scrum and Kanban, and I actually managed to find similar representations of how Scrum and Kanban look at the scope of change. Both of those are story maps, okay? The highlighted post-its in the Kanban map are the things that you typically start with when you do a Kanban implementation. The dimmed ones are options that you might do later. It's not necessarily part of the core change of the Kanban method. When you look at Scrum, it's a bit fuzzy in this picture, but you can see that about 70% of all the things that you do around Scrum are considered core. It's upfront investment, upfront change. That's the difference there. That's something you need to consider. So, for example, what we do with our clients is upfront we try to fit the change mode to what they're looking for. So, for example, here, this client said, okay, I understand the picture. I see the value of Kanban and of flow. I see the value of Scrum, of feature teams. That's another experiment I want to try. So let's start with, in April, let's do a Kanban evolution. Let's plan on a Scrum pilot in May, June. And let's do Scrum to the face later on if it works. So that's the thing on the left there. It's something that you need to consider when you go in to the change. Another way to look at it is the 20-mile march from Great by Choice. So it talks about fanatic discipline, about the pace of something. And when we talk about change programs, we talk about fanatic discipline of the change pace. So not too fast, not too slow, but sustainable pace. Great book, by the way. So a very popular question these days is, should we start with Scrum or Kanban? So Scrum is this left black trail, black diamond trail there. Black diamonds are usually on the way down, right? But this one was on the way up. It's faster, but you take a more tense road up there, tense trail up there. And because it's more tense, actually a lot of people get stuck on this cozy house in the middle. They don't get to where they initially wanted to get. On the other way around, there's this Kanban road, which will take more time to get to the same place, but there's also the opportunity to stop somewhere in the middle, and from that place, start to look at the bigger picture. Continue your improvement. So maybe you don't need to get to here in order to look elsewhere and see what's the next step. But the important thing is that both Scrum and Kanban are ways to start, are frameworks that are used later on to inspect and adapt. There are contexts where Kanban works best, contexts where Scrum works best, but they're both inspect and adapt methods, and if you're not using them that way, then you're losing the power of both. So moving on to another kind of thing that affects improvement. There's this story about medieval times, about this traveler who comes upon 3 stonemasons. He asks each in turn, what are you doing? The first answers, I'm cutting this stone. The second says, I'm completing the wall. You see the stone within a wall. And the third one, doing the same kind of job, but says, I'm building a cathedral. I'm looking at the bigger picture. I know why I'm doing this. If you look at our times, you can see 3 teams that are doing the same activity with plus and delta on a flip chart. And the same guy asks around, what are you doing? And one team says, we're holding a retrospective, just because someone told us you need to hold a retrospective. And the other team says, we are improving our performance. We're doing continuous improvement, not just doing a meeting called a retrospective. And the third team says, we're trying to build a better business. There's a reason behind what we're trying to do here. So here we come to the fact that we want to understand the perceived value of the improvement. It's not improvement for the cargo culture of just running retrospectives because the book says so. It's not even improvement because Agile says continuous improvement or Lean says Kaizen. It's improvement because that's something that the business needs. Okay, it needs to be meaningful. It needs to achieve our business goals. So you might want to start with why you are doing this change. Have more passion about it. One way to do it, I'm not yet sure it's the best way, but it's something that I've been using the last year or so, and it's been better than before, is when you start a discussion with an organization about doing agility, when they invite you in, you say, okay, why am I here? Why do you want me to waste your time or to invest your time? And I give them this list of options and ask them to play by a feature, give people money or votes, and sometimes just ask them to vote, sometimes ask them to have a discussion, try to convince each other and learn from the dynamics of that discussion. And then we come up with the reasons why to improve. Just that's all of it from version 1's survey. One side note is that recently when I talk with people about this concept of lean startup, whether it's lean startups or enterprises, it comes up as a very good reason to go agile. It makes sense to a lot of people. Much more sense than the other things over there. I find there's more traction when we talk about those things. So, an example again, starting with an organization, do the voting, put what they chose on the wall. Then we go and build an implementation backlog, discuss all the options. And at the end, we wrap it to what will be the metrics to make sure that we are achieving our goals and try to trace those metrics to the backlog that we set up. So if we chose Kanban, for example, and we have a metric of escaping defects because we chose improving quality as one of our goals, then we try to think why Kanban would reduce the number of escaping defects. That's inspired by Lean Ocean Canry, policy deployment matrix. There are also other ways to do it. More complex and less complex ways to look at it. But the important thing is whatever you use to do this traceability, whether it's formal or less formal, do it up front. Even if you're not going to measure it up front, discuss it up front because it helps the organization understand the meaning of what they're going to invest a lot of time and effort into. The next issue that usually comes later on in the cycle, after you install the system and you start to talk about trying to fix things, and you start to talk about experiments and you inspect and adapt, at the fact that teams in their retrospectives, when they find that something is not working, they might actually make a change to how they work. So if they make a change to how they're working, wouldn't that change the way that they're working from how the rest of the organization is working? Isn't that a problem? So there are a couple of problems that organizations raise with that. One of them is, how do we ensure that those experiments do not stray from the righteous path, from our direction? How do we avoid the Babel Tower? Maintain a shared language in the organization. What do we do if the boards look different? If we have different kinds of measures for the story points, whatever it is. And beyond that, isn't all of this a waste of time? We're paying you a good money to come in and share from your experience. Tell us how to do things. Okay? It's a real problem. So we need to create the willingness and the openness to experiment, as well as provide some guidance for those experiments. So the first thing to do is probably to expose people, management, leadership to the concepts of complexity. Talk to them about Kinefen, give them the adapt book, show them the video of Don's talk from this morning, okay, about uncertainty. That's a good start. Try to show people that there's uncertainty in their environment. Show them examples that there needs to be a different solution. That if everything works the same way, you are much more prone to problems. You are not optimized. The next thing is guidance. You want to establish the values that filter your experiments, that guide the way. So you can use the Agile Manifesto as a guidance. Choose the things that you like from the Manifesto as an organization. You don't have to choose everything. Scrum values, Declaration of Interdependence, software craftsmanship, Marine Corps doctrine, the fire department doctrine, whatever. Okay? But have something that people are aware of, shared values, that you know that when there are experiments, you're looking at, okay, when we decide to track micro details in our board and share everything in reports every hour, how does that align with our doctrine, with our values? Is that helping? Is it not helping? When we decide to do tests later on in big batches as an experiment to solve something, is that in the right direction, in the wrong direction? It will reduce the number of things that are not aligned with the direction we're trying. Another thing you might want to try is when you look at explicit policies, you might want to say, okay, there's one option for each team to have a whole set of different policies. Another option is to say there's a small set of shared ones that might get updated when a certain team thinks of something good to add there. And there might be other things that will be specific to each team, like object-oriented, okay? And you might want to include the concept of sharing and reusing successful experiments to the policies of other teams. Have some process to do that. Yep. Well, listening to Don this morning, I was looking later on at the presentation and was thinking maybe we don't necessarily need all of this. Maybe it's enough to have shared principles, or maybe the values are principles that are enough, and then the policies really are okay to be distributed. I'm not yet sure about what to do. Yeah, makes sense. Get promoted. But, yeah, I guess so. Another thing when doing experiments is we need to make sure that it makes more sense to do experiments towards some focus, towards some goal. Which brings us to the next topic. What I want you to do right now, as an intro to the next topic, is select the person next to you and do a 1-minute retro for the conference. Plus, delta, one thing that worked well, one thing you would approve. Take 1 minute and do it. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. It's very exciting to do a retro for the conference. If you want, we can meet here at 5 or 5:30 and do it longer. Might not be such a bad idea, but what I wanted to demonstrate here was that when we do a retrospective, usually we do a scatter or shotgun approach. I didn't tell you what I wanted you to improve. We didn't have a shared focus of what to improve on. So I will not ask you what were your ideas for improvement, but I would guess that they were not very focused. So the next thing to look at in your improvement is to focus it, to have it related to what you're trying to achieve. So a very good model to look at is the Toyota Kata. How many people here are familiar with the improvement Kata? Okay, so I'll explain it a bit for the rest of you. So basically the improvement Kata, talked about in Mike Rother's book, the Toyota Kata, is a focused model for improvement. It talks about first understanding the direction where you're trying to go. What is the current condition? What's currently the way you operate? And then you take small steps focused towards that direction. The next step towards that direction. What will be the next condition of working? And then when you ask what to improve, you ask what to improve about the next, how to work around or overcome the next obstacle to the way to that obstacle. So if we look at the conference, we might want to ask ourselves, okay, we are focused on learning that will stick. Okay? And if I asked you to do a retrospective or even more focused, a perfection game, saying, okay, we want a conference that will earn 10 out of 10 in learning that will stick. What would be your score for the conference that you enjoyed in the last 3 days in learning that will stick? Would that be a 1, a 5, a 10? Okay, think about it for a couple of seconds. Even thinking about it sets you in the mindset to better answer the question, okay, what made you put it at 7, for example? So those are things that we want to repeat and emphasize the next time. And what would the conference need to do to make it 10? So similarly, what I do at the end of several training sessions recently is I do a return on time investment. Ask the people, how did you feel about the session? And after asking them, then ask, okay, what made this free for you so that we should repeat it next time? Give me the present of knowing what to do next time. And even more important, the present of what would make it a 5 for you. Okay, so it's more focused that way. So scope and experimentation, guidance, and value, and focus. And we can have ourselves a good plan of what we want to do in our implementation. We have a backlog of things that we want to do on the left there. We have the things we're currently doing, the upcoming backlog. We can manage this. We have a perfect plan, right? So it's like playing Minesweeper with the map shown. That's easy. This one is a bit more foggy. I'm not a great Minesweeper player. Even getting to get this view took me a long, long time to play until I got to this level. So it's very hard. So in our change programs, there are a lot of risks as well. Let's find those risky assumptions. It's not a clear plan. What will stick in the organization? What will be rejected? What will fit to the culture? What will not? What will actually be a step forward towards the goals? What will not? How do How do we know that the people will care about what we're doing here? So they will go around and make it grow with minimal help from us being coaches, managers, whatever. So we need to learn along the way. We cannot assume we know everything when we go into the change. So one way to look at it, and I will admit up front that I don't really know whether that's the right way to do it, but let's try and learn, is that when you have the improvement goal, try to find the minimum change that you can do to test whether you have the right idea about getting to that improvement goal and whether that improvement goal actually improves what you're doing. Okay, you want to validate both your direction and your tactics using this minimum viable change. So one way to do it can be the Kanban method. The Kanban method is minimum. It is targeted at being the minimum viable change that installs a new way of working. It is something that should be quite easy to grow inside the organization. But you still need to do some things around it to adopt the experimentation mindset while adopting or installing or letting Kanban loose in your organization, whatever kind of implementation you're doing, whether it's from the top, bottoms up, whatever. So this is basically the lean startup approach, but applied to change. Instead of building code or product, you build a certain change. You then measure the results of the change, whether it's actually measuring data or just looking at behavior and trying to learn from it. How formal this needs to be is a good question. And then you need to learn from it and either deploy in bigger numbers because you reduce the risks and you know what to do, or pivot to another kind of thing. So you might have this kind of board that looks at different kinds of change going on in the organization, minimize the amount of changes going on. Yes, Jeff?
What about if you need to actually measure it?
You're skipping a bit ahead. I've given it some thought, but the main thought is that we don't know too much about what we're dealing with, and we need to experiment a lot with it. It's shaky grounds. So basically, this manages the flow of experiments in your change program, but a similar kind of board can be used for your product as well. So I didn't want this one in the flow. Again, we start with identifying the minimum viable change. Go back to the discussion of scope. And when discussing the scope, think about not just the target, but how risky it is, and finding the minimum viable change that can show you you're on the right path. Install the change engine. Install some things so you will be able to measure, to start seeing how things are working, to have something to start to tune. You cannot tune when there isn't anything that's working. Then you tune the engine. You start to do operation reviews maybe to look at the data of improvement, of the results of different kinds of trainings or introductions that you do, or coaching approaches, or the data of the actual product, the actual process, the actual capabilities that change. Then you start looking periodically, do we want to keep coaching or managing the change the way we are right now, or do we want to change? Maybe you want to change. Again, pivot or pursue? Let's pursue. And you keep climbing the mountain. So these are several of the 9 things to focus on when you try to fix improvement. To summarize it, I tried to come up with an improvement manifesto which includes the things that we discussed as well as some others. I don't know whether anything will happen with it beyond being shown here, but it's a good summary of this talk. So sustainable pace over burnout or shock therapy, evolving through experiments and validated learning over following a plan, framed as achieving performance goals rather than holding improvement routines, focused improvement towards goal rather than scattered improvements, guided and informed experimentation mindset over unwillingness to try or fail or deal with heterogeneity, work with the organizational network, something I didn't discuss, over shortcuts that seem easier or more convenient, like telling coaches to go directly and work with the people, integrate to the organizational cadence versus inventing a totally new cadence and dropping it on the organization. The timing, start improvements when the timing is right, over starting a cool improvement just because the manager returned from a conference, even though we're currently in a death march toward a horrible version. Wait for the change leaders who care rather than managers who happen to be free right now and can take on this project. The last thing I would leave you thinking about is that even this is an experiment. It's a kind of thinking. There's another section over there that you might dive into if you go online that says, how do we test that the approaches towards improving the change are actually working? Do we want to look at the number of retrospectives that currently happen in the organization? I don't know. Do we want to look at the number of issues raised by the teams? Do we want to look at the failed experiments that happen? There are many different kinds of metrics that you might think of. Try to think of metrics that don't show anything useful versus metrics that are actionable, that you can do something about. And that's about it. And we have time for a couple of questions, I think. Yeah, Mike, and then Jason.
So I've been following what you and Jeff have been doing over the last few months, and So I've been following what you and Jeff have been doing over the last few months, and it's been cool. And I've spoken to both of you offline and all of that. One thing that occurs to me, a lot of the attention is on the transference of quite low-level practices and observing that they're working, and there's some validation there. But how do you validate that the thinking that goes with the practice is there too, or are you dealing with that separately, or how are you dealing with that?
I didn't discuss the level of the practices that you're dealing with, and I share that concern. I think that there's the issue. There are two issues here. One is that you might need to measure the effectiveness of installing the change. The change might be a practice of running Kanban, only to create a situation where you actually have enough data or enough teams, people running the system so you can start measuring the actual effect of it. So the end goal is to measure the effect of what you're doing at the product level, at the capabilities level of the system. But you might not be able to measure that up front. You might need to take a road until you get to that stage. Sure, but I'm not sure that out of the gate it's a realistic goal to look at. So you might need to have the initial MVC of, for example, creating a capable, stable, flow-managed organization might require a smaller MVC of something that you use to install this flow system, to install this Kanban method. Jason.
Just a comment on that last question. So that's like what you describe as like version 1000. So we should, or version infinity or something, but we should look at version 1. Just thinking about this, using that lean startup metaphor, is there a we'd expect actually there would be a point, because you'd pivot and pivot and pivot, but you'd hit a point where you'd have significant traction, so everyone is now keen to buy the idea, if you will. So is there a stage here where you expect to scale quickly?
Yeah. Yeah. You look for, in my mind at least, you look for experimenting for a while until you see that you have a working method. So for example, if you talk about how to train teams to introduce them to kickstart Kanban there, you might try a couple of approaches, and after the third one you see, wow, within half a day and 2 visits and some involvement from the manager, we have a team that's running and infecting other teams. They get great results. Let's continue. Let's do that. Let's stop experimenting. Just go out and do this approach. That's at least the way I see it. And try to reach that stage as fast as possible because those experiments are expensive. Last question.
I think we're out of time. We need to
out of
take the next
time.
one, yeah.
So out of time.
Thank you.
I don't want you to tackle me. Thanks.